Our second speaker is Professor Vijay Sathe. Formerly professor and affiliate researcher at Deccan College Postgraduate and Research Institute, Pune, he holds a doctorate in vertebrate paleontology and has examined faunal collections from prehistoric to early historic sites in India. He has been a visiting professor at universities in South Korea and Italy and has traveled widely for academic collaborations as well as international conferences. He has authored over 70 research publications. He is actively involved in public outreach programs in the art and science of faunal studies. Professor Vijay Sathe will now speak on revisiting the past to narrow literary errors, what faunal records say.
Suprabhatam. At the outset, I'm very much thankful to organizers of Pondi Lit Fest, especially Aloji, at that time here today. And the talk of my this morning is focusing on animals and what literature has to say and what kind of corrections, if at all required. How do we look at literature and archaeology, especially with regard to animals or animal remains, is something which I take the liberty of speaking this morning. Except that I'll not be taking too many animals in this today's talk because for the time constraint. So I take the animal which has basically, without which the evidences have been found by Dr. Manjul. And I'm really grateful to him that he has already prepared a canvas for me, and I'm just there to dot the lines with the help of a horse. So, if you look at many other animals and literature, we have, for example, camel, which is very much contested with regard to its presence or absence in Indus Valley civilization. Or for that matter, elephant, of course, which is there in archaeological records, which is there in literature. But it doesn't generate so much of controversy, or rather, for that matter, it doesn't really raises the brows of so many people, because I think it doesn't have so much of connotations with regard to presence or absence of the animal. So, because of this reason that I'm referring to horse here, and I'll be covering some part of its discoveries and how interpretation and analysis points to what, and exactly how we need to rethink about the evidence of horse, and how this evidence perhaps would be needing more of extensive examination of the material to arrive at a definite conclusion of its presence or absence in Indus Valley civilization. Before going into this horse in modern times, I take you to back in slice of time, deep time of Pleistocene, or rather prior to Pleistocene, that originating from America, the horse travels all the way from different parts of the world and via Bering Strait, from via Bering Strait, it just goes down to Yes, you can look at this route by which it has traveled down, and this India's earliest evidence of horse is named as Equus chivalensis because its fossils have been discovered from the formations of Shivalik hills of northwest India. And going into again into little further down into central India and South India, we have this species known as Equus pneumaticus. But by and large, all these horses in India vanished by before or around 20,000 years ago. And that's why we have absolutely no evidence of horse whatsoever as far as or we cannot have any connection between the horse that of modern today and this particular horse. So we have no evidence of horse after the beginning of Holocene in India. So we look at from this perspective now that domestication of horse is one of the most interesting episodes in the history of mankind. It has literally changed the world altogether, brought the people closer, and also acrimony of Kazakhstan. these two sites which are falling in this area which has been highlighted here. And if you look at these two sites, one is Derevika, as I said before, and Botai. So Botai is now widely internationally accepted as one of the first, perhaps the first site of domestication of horse. And but when we move from that to have a look at little horse facts, what horse facts we have today. And interestingly, on the basis of genetic record, that we get to know that modern domestic horse is not descending from the Botai. At the same time, the modern horse's actual geographical place of origin is contested, is not known at all. So these are the few details which we get to know from the scientists from examining DNA. And also at the same time, the Botai horse and the Przewalski horse. The only wild horse that world has is Przewalski horse, which was discovered in Mongolian steppes by Przewalski way back in 1869 or 70, and after which it has been named by Pawlowski, it has been named as Przewalski. So this Equus Przewalski is the only wild which is supposed to be having any relationship with this ancient horse, which we think of as domesticated. But today's world population world horse population is 60 million. And at the same time, we have 600 breeds. And as the scientists would tell from in the field of genetics, that perhaps next to humans, horse is maximally examined and documented. And of course, when you look at the world view, India has just barely 0.3 million horses today. And we know for sure that besides equestrian and all that economic importance, the developing world still has its use in transport and also as beast of burden. So as far as arrival of horses in India is concerned, or as far as horse and India, the two concepts coming together, there is a very important discussion going on for last nearly 100 years that whether horses are from India or horses were brought in India or horses came and Aryans sitting on horses, they just came over and defeated the locals, and that's how the horses came. Otherwise, India never had any horse. So this issue has been very, very deeply contested, and what we find here is that there are two distinct groups which have been formed in the process of historical research, invasionists and indigenists, and the former always believes that the horse has not been there at all, and they have given multiple examples or multiple proofs to show that skeletal record of horses is very, very dismally poor, and it might be confused with that of wild ass, or maybe sometimes with domestic ass. Then they say that the horse did not enter into India until 1700 BC. After that also, you find its remains in in Harappan deposits. Then they also say that Rigveda and horse, where Rigveda has more than 200 times the reference to horse. And at the same time, they say that they don't find Rigveda, horse, and Aryans and the local Harappans. There's absence of congruity, indicating that the horse in India is completely a fabricated story as regards to people who are talking about horse, basically very much there in India, even prior to the 1700 BC. So the impact of this hypothesis or this theory has been tremendous in India. If you look at the syllabi of all examinations, competitive examinations, all MA courses or doctoral, or even people working in the field of research, of equine research, you find that this concept goes everywhere. So I think it's really necessary for us to examine this material remains for the skeletal remains of horses to confirm whether really this is true or Harappans had horses. So let us look at the horses in Indus Valley. As I said before, that Dr. Manjua has made my job very easy because he has given a canvas of Harappan, so we all know the time line of Harappan civilization, at the same time the area where they lived, and they prospered, they perished later on. But when we think of certain localities, such as Mohenjo-daro, or at the same time Kalibanga, Harappa, Rakhigadi, Dholavira, but so much so in Surkotada and Lothal, that we have this evidence of horse or evidence of equus, as the genus equus is, it becomes much, much striking and important with regard to its identification as that of horse. Another locality, Binjore, MSR, which Dr. Manjur has just a while ago described about. This was also excavated, and in his invitation, I examined these bones, and we had evidence of 6 skeletal remains, 3 teeth and 2 phalanges and 1 fragment of jaw. And looking at the number of bones, it's certainly interesting, noteworthy discovery with regard to equus. I would confine at this point of time to equus, but yes, it has very close morphological affinity with that of equus caballus. You go to this Harappan cities in Gujarat, and you have this site called Surkotada and Lothal, where we also have a good record of bones. And in fact, Surkotada has generated so much of interest. This reminds me of a very interesting passage in the books and publications that way back in 1940s, when this material from Ranagundai was being examined by these scholars, this Lorelei cantonment veterinary doctor, he examined these bones from Ranagundai, and he said that they are, of course, of horse, because in my cavalry, what horses I have been examining, it confirms identification that of horse. So that was so easy to go by the examination and the results and observations made by a veterinary doctor in Lorelei cantonment. But sooner, the material was given away to Dr. Zoiner. He is one of the best-known authorities on archaeology, but at the same time, he also has specialization in geoarchaeology. And geology. So this scholar identified, he said, no, it's likelihood of being of an ass, because it doesn't really look so similar. He, having said this, having belonged to the wild ass probably, and this kind of a doubt has continued even today. So this, in fact, before that, we don't find the presence of horse being contested. But as soon as you find the first record of Zoiner making such a comment and getting very popular in the literature thereafter, that you start finding slowly and slowly the doubts being sown in the minds of people that there's certainly not a horse but a donkey. From the site of Surkotada, we have the excavations carried out by Dr. Jagatpati Joshi, and they have yielded about 34 bones. And these 34 bones are including a lot of teeth and the phalanges and the hoof bones and also some metapodials. And this was, there have been many scholars from Archaeological Survey of India who identified this, one of them Dr. Sharma, who confirmed that this could be of horse. But as I said, that controversy had already started, so it needed to be ended. But anyway, this still goes on. Many scholars were invited, and from that onwards, the journey became much more interesting. But before that, let us look at this spread of equus bones in Indian archaeological sites, especially with regard to Harappa. Harappan sites, you can see there are 16 sites. You can see number of sites are 16. 2 are Mohenjo-daro Harappa from Pakistan, but these Pakistan Harappa reports are based on pre-47 reports. After 47, surprisingly, the material that comes from Pakistan, we don't get to hear any report on horse or anything for that matter. So whether this is all happening really out of its absence or we just cannot make any comment on that. But I wonder whether we'll ever hear any true story of a horse from Pakistan in Harappan sites. These many sites we have, and if you can look at this table, equus caballus, equus asinus, equus hemionus, that is the half-ass, wild ass, and this is equus indeterminate, could be either caballus or asinus, I mean to say horse or donkey. So this is the spread of all these, and you have the sites from Harappa going down to Dholavira, Bhagwanpura, and further down south, down below, this is the last site which we we examined, and the site of Binjore has given us a good record of equus bones. Now the question comes to, what kind of bones have been recovered from these sites, and what they entail in terms of a story of a horse, or story of equus, or horse or ass, or story of an ass in Indus Valley. But there is another very interesting story about the horse before Harappa. Because we have been talking about horses not there in Harappa. Prior to Harappa, there is no horse. Prior to 1700 BC, there is no horse. But look at these sites. This site is called Mahagada in Indo-Gangetic Plain in Prayagraj district of Uttar Pradesh, where we have a date of 2265. Hallur in Haveri district of Karnataka, near Dharwad. They also have a confirmed horse, and also Kaitha in Ujjain in Madhya Pradesh, where they also have a horse. And all these dates are definitely predating the actual horse, which people have been advocating so far, whose arrival is considered after 1700 BC. So there is a lot of contradiction that goes around, that horse could have been there before, or horse came later. But on the basis of this physical evidence, we just feel that yes, we are convinced that it could be that it's a question of identification that needs to be examined once again. Now, the bones and teeth from Surkottara have generated a lot of controversy, because initially, when one of the very well-known scientists from Hungary, when he was invited by Archaeological Survey of India, he examined these bones, and 34 bones, and he came to the conclusion that out of 34, 6 are 100%, they are very much of horse, caballine, not a donkey or a wild ass. And the rest 26 might be considered as probably of either half wild ass or domestic. But 6 certainly confirm to the presence of horse in Surkottara. And that too, interestingly, mature Harappan levels. That is that's the reality of Surkottara. And later on, when his conclusion about actual presence of horse in Surkottara sparked further controversy, and again, another set of archaeologists from America, they arrived in and they examined these bones all over again. They came to the conclusion that not a single bone belongs to a horse, but all definitely come from a wild ass, for the reasons of their size. But when we look at the morphological differences, there are certain very few handful of differences. Unfortunately, the material at Surkottara, which was examined by Professor Bakani from Hungary, the material belonged to the diagnostic features were very much available on these bones, and it was possible to identify by him to be of caballine. The question is that the lateral view, that is of another American archaeologist, has persisted throughout the literature of Indus Valley civilization. You go to any publications, there's always a doubt about presence of horse in Indus Valley. And this reference of American archaeologist has become a kind of a final statement with regard to horse in Indus Valley. So this is where we feel the need of re-look at the entire collection. These are some bones. I'd just like to show some bones, how they look like from archaeological record, because unfortunately, in archaeology, the inadequacy and incompleteness is the curse, and which is bound to happen. So how do we do the jigsaw puzzle, you could call it, or we can join the dots, or maybe you can reconstruct the entire skeleton with the help of small pieces of bones, or think of its identification on the basis of certain diagnostic features is always an exercise which archaeologists or paleontologists goes into. And there we find that these are, in fact, this particular tooth of Binjore goes very, very close to horse. And that's why, because there are certain features in this which I'll not go into the details right now, but they all suggest the possibility of a horse being here at Binjore. Some examples of I'm giving you here are of horse teeth from Surkottara. This is really a fabled study because it's a remarkable, outstanding report given by Dr. Bokani, and that has that has remained so far unchallenged. But anyway, some more of remains of horse teeth that Dr. Bocconi has examined and published in his report of 1997 that I share with you here. And these are some very interesting features within the teeth, like certain areas here, that the length, breadth, and all on the basis of morphometrical analysis has become possible to establish for him to call it as a hoof of horse. Some hoof bones or horseshoe and some limb bones are also examined by him. And but when we look at horse after Harappa, surprisingly, there have been discussions around that there has been no horse, and the bones are very, very dismally poor compared to cattle, sheep, buffalo, sheep, goat. And in archaeological site, when the excavations are conducted, when we have the bones available to study, we find that the bones, a majority of them are belonging to cattle, buffalo, and some of them are, of course, sheep, goat, pig, and all. That's the order of presence, and most of them have extensive cut and charring marks, indicating that they must certainly part of food debris. But the question is that some in case of Binjore, we had one bone which is completely charred, that of horse phalanx, hoof bone of completely charred, hoof bone of a horse, of an equus. So it's always felt that when there are no bones, probably it has no importance, and probably people of Harappa had no importance, they didn't know at all anything about horses. So when this is all being contested, or this is all being argued upon, we look at this horse after Harappa, and we find that except these Takshila or Hastinapur, Rupar, Ataranyikheda, Nagda, or Sor Ranath, there are reports of presence of horse, but they're very, very dismally poor. They just go into hardly 4, 5, 6, 7 bones. Why so less? What could have been the reasons of not finding horses so many? In fact, in today's context, when we look at the villages, how many horses are there in villages? Today, in fact, not today exactly, but 30, 40 years ago, there would be tangas going around with hardly 2 families owning a tanga, and they're doing this auto rickshaw business in terms of actual animal being pulled into for all this transportation. But if you look at the contribution of horse and regular routine of a village, we find the presence of horse as it is in a very, very limited number. So when we look at in early historic India, we have empty number of examples where the horses, until we go into the Mauryan times, we don't have really so much of horse. And horse coming in iconography is only Mauryan and post-Mauryan. So as it is, the horse is basically limited in terms of its presentation. And on top of it, just because the bones are too less in number, and at the same time, horse is not represented on any seals. Paintings on pottery are very, very poor, very, very limited. But interestingly, some terracotta figurines and also some terracotta wheels with the spoked paintings along the hub, they all indicate that we definitely have Harappans aware of these, because on top of it, that's from Lothal, and this is from Mohenjo-daro. These 2 figurines are, of course, confirmed by archaeologists, and also this confirmed to the presence of horse in the sense that people were very much aware of horses in Indus Valley. And terracotta wheels that we have from Birrana or from Rakhigadi or also from Banavali, they all conform to this kind of spoked wheel. Is always a big contested issue in that. Probably they didn't know this. They didn't know the wheels. Wheels were solid, not spoked. One argument was put forth from that point of view, and also that chariots were not there at all. And we have heard just a while before about this wonderful story of chariots. So I think it goes pretty close to our observations that yes, now there is a need to really look at the material to confirm its presence in Indus Valley. Now, when we look at this Rigvedic presence of horse in Rigveda, now there's one argument that there have been 200 times the horse has been referred to in Rigveda. And also, there are some references we find here, like for example, only one reference. Surprisingly, there's only one reference in Rigveda with regard to riding. Ashwamedh is also referred to only once, that too in the later mandala. And then this mention of not riding but yoked into chariot is another example that we find referred to in Rigveda. And interestingly, this looks like that probably it was, could this have been symbolic? So this the presence of horse or concept of horse, not exactly from the physical terms, but also from the term of its power, that it was a kind of a metaphor rather than having this presence of horse so much so in this period of Rigvedic period. So towards the end of it, I would like to, because when we talk of presence of horse or presence of horse in Rigveda, I'm reminded of a very interesting quote by Aurobindoji from his history of Upanishads. So I would like to read this about, because how it was he who for the first time in 1912 and 13 and 14, prior to an Indus Valley the discovery, he had referred to the horse not merely as an indicator of, in flesh and blood, but of course it had taken its another implication as power, as nothing but absolute energy that he referred to it as. I quote, "The cow and horse, go and ashwa are constantly associated. Usha, the dawn, is described as Gomati, Ashwavati. Dawn gives to the sacrificer horses and cows. As applied to the physical dawn, Gomati means accompanied by or bringing the rays of light, and is an image of the dawn of illumination in the human mind. Therefore, Ashwavati also cannot refer merely to the physical steed. It must have a psychological significance as well. A study of the Vedic horse led me to the conclusion that Go and Ashwa represent the two companion ideas of light and energy, consciousness and force." I quote. So this is from Secrets of the Veda by Aurobindo, that they gave us a very interesting example way back, even much prior to Indus Valley, discovery of Indus Valley, that there is a dire need of relook at the entire collection from the perspective of literature and archaeology. So this is need of the hour, that is flummoxing issue, which has been there plaguing Indian archaeology for nearly 100 years, needs to be addressed with a very, very solid research, and of course, many more multi-pronged approach to this problem. I look forward to a solution to find out that yes, Indus had a horse, and this horse is not something which was brought in by supposed Aryans, but very much part of it, and there is a total congruity between horses and Rigveda and Harappans. I hope so, but much suspense on the recent examination that we should be waiting for to talk about presence and absence of horse in Indus Valley civilization. Thank you.
From these, is DNA extractable from these specimens, and can polymorphisms be used to distinguish between donkeys and horses?
Well, you'll have a satisfactory answer from honorable speaker next to me. But I would say yes, some archaeological material has been sent for analysis, and it has become possible to detect its presence. But how we are able to multiply it and to our scientific conclusions is a need of the hour. We need to have more of libraries with regard to modern day horses, modern day indigenous breeds, and see how we can compare it with. But this is certainly possible. And if that becomes the reality, I think Indian history, Indian archaeology will have a new chapter to begin with.